I can kind of see it. Gamers is mad about something. That in itself isn't really news. I mean, gamers love to get mad. And I ain't even complaining. As I'm sure we've discussed before, getting mad is a huge part of the fun of being a gamer. I mean, I'm a Nintendo fan. I'm mad all the time. I love it. And while anger is only natural and healthy, it is often funny what kinds of things we get mad about when you zoom out a bit and look at things from an outside perspective. For instance, what's the thing gamers are mad about right now? Well, it's yellow paint. It's yellow paint. Specifically, the use of paint in games to signpost interactable objects to the player. Yellow is not the only color you'll find, it's often just white, but yellow is certainly the most striking color, so yellow paint has kind of become the term we use for the whole concept. Signposting paint has been around for a while, cropping up here and there, generally in big AAA releases, and it's one of those things that people start to notice, then with each new example, it becomes more and more of a thing. You know, and of course, plenty of people get more and more annoyed by it as time goes on. The Resident Evil 4 remake made heavy use of yellow paint, and that came out pretty recently, so then the whole discourse has been dredged up all over again by Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Early footage of the game shows Cloud climbing a rocky wall with yellow paint kinda clumsily smeared here and there to indicate grabbable ledges. Naturally, being yet another example of something people were already starting to grow tired of, this has made the debate more heated than ever. Indeed, this has become quite the hot button topic. Most people have pretty strong feelings about this one way or the other. Me? I do lean more toward one side of the debate, but I can certainly see both sides. And really, I think this is one of those things where there isn't any one right answer. Before we launch into this, I do want to mention first that overall readability in modern games is a big issue. There's that great video Dunkey did several years ago where he talks about Halo Master Chief Collection and how the modern graphics are a lot less clear.
Now look at Halo 1. Look at how much visual clarity you have. The enemies have these bright, contrasting colors. They pop right out of the background. The player knows exactly what they're looking at. And then, boop, you turn on the new graphics and you're instantly at a disadvantage now.
I agree with him there, and I think that is a whole very important discussion for another day. In this video, we're just talking about interactable objects in games and their signposting and whatnot. Just the yellow paint, essentially. So let's talk about it. There is a good reason devs keep electing to use this kind of signposting in their games. Despite what many people will claim, it seems that most gamers do indeed benefit from the help. Over and over again, we see devs chiming in and describing their own experiences with playtesters. It is more common than you might expect for a player to get a little stuck in a game because they're not quite sure where to go or what to do or what they're supposed to be interacting with. Clear markings help guide players so they don't have to do any guesswork. And of course, yellow is the most vibrant, eye-catching color. I'm sure there are loads of sources that can go into the color theory behind it and all that stuff and tell you exactly why yellow works best. But again, a clear, striking white can also work pretty well too. Really anything that stands out from the environment. The thing is, even when devs share these stories about how, yes, many people have problems without clear signposting, anti-painters tend to claim that gamers only have problems when they are too lazy or stupid to pay attention. They claim that people simply need to follow directions and look for context clues. We'll talk more about this angle in a bit, but that's really a key point in this perspective. They feel that it is unnecessary to hold the player's hand, so to speak, to quite that degree. Another big thing, though, is that they dislike paint because they feel that it breaks immersion. Signs scattered all over the place, pointing the player to their next goal or to objects they can interact with, it pulls them out of the experience. The funny thing about this, though, is that immersion is the reason the devs used paint instead of HUD elements like arrows. Paint is diegetic. It exists in world. Unless you're playing a game where the character themselves has some kind of fancy sci-fi vision display like Horizon or Metroid, it doesn't really make sense that the character could see all these arrows and lines and bits of reminder text and whatnot. But paint? That's more realistic. It makes more sense in the context of the game world itself. It's more natural overall. But then the problem is that you've got to have a good reason for that paint to exist as well. And it's pretty hard to come up with excuses for paint to be slathered all over every climbable ledge and interactable object in the world. It can be done, but it's not always easy, and inevitably the character will come to a place where there's just absolutely no reason for anything to have paint on it. Someone might argue that HUD elements like arrows are things that we're all just used to by now. So even if they don't make sense in world, we understand that they're just a way for the game to deliver information to the player, not necessarily the character. So even if they're less natural, they manage to feel less immersion breaking than in-world signposting that does not make any canonical sense. We have simply been conditioned to accept HUD elements. And you know what? I can certainly understand this perspective. And I can also understand being annoyed about something in a game that just feels really pointless. You know, some little, tiny little thing that bugs you to no end and you just don't know why it had to be there. However, at the end of the day, I would definitely say I am more pro-paint than anything. You can talk about lazy and stupid gamers all day, but that's a pretty silly oversimplification, and it's the one opinion in this debate that is indeed just flat out wrong. There are so many reasons why signposting can be a very good thing across the board. It's an accessibility thing for starters. Paint makes it a lot easier for people with visual impairments or maybe other impairments to recognize what needs to be recognized in any given game situation. But it goes even deeper than that. Don't just consider people with disabilities. Also consider that brains and eyes work differently for everyone. We all process visual information differently. For instance, I am easily overwhelmed by visual information. Not being able to see clearly, whether in a game or in real life, it causes me a lot of anxiety. I hate driving at night or when it's raining because even though I can see enough to keep going, not being able to see everything around me clearly, it just feels bad. I don't know, it makes me feel on edge. And here's the thing about video games. Especially in recent years, they have gotten so, I sound like such an old man here, but they've gotten so visually complicated. Paint and similar things like tape and all that mainly exist in AAA games because that's where you're gonna find photorealistic graphics, these dense, richly detailed environments where it can be genuinely hard for me to tell what objects I can interact with or even where I'm supposed to go. And now that we're playing in 4K, there is literally 4 times the visual information on screen. 4 times! A simple still image of a game is now something you can get lost in. You can play find the hidden object games. It's just so much stuff in such vivid detail. It really runs the risk of overwhelming my brain, making it difficult to see what I'm supposed to see. And if I get stuck, I can't figure out what I'm supposed to do, an anti-painter might look at me and talk about how I'm too stupid to figure out what is obvious, too lazy to take the proper time needed to assess the situation. But it's like, yeah, sorry, I'm not trying to be stupid here. I've been playing games a long time. I'm not like great at them or anything, but I generally know my way around a video game. But something about this is not clicking with my brain. Oh, playing Resident Evil 4 though? What a comfortable experience. I am always so thankful for the paint. I'm so glad I always know what I can interact with without doing any guesswork. It lessens the mental load on my brain. It reduces the amount of energy my brain has got to spend, leaving more energy for other stuff, like kicking zombies and obsessively hoarding ammo. And as for the immersion factor, it's just not that big of a deal to me. I don't know, it's just like the HUD. It's something I just accept and ignore. Resi 4 is made up almost entirely of human-built environments, so it makes more sense for someone somewhere to have smeared paint on something. But even if I'm playing some other game and exploring some ancient temple where no humans have touched it for 1,000 years, and there's paint on a ledge, like, I could get annoyed by it, but it's a video game. I get it. It's so easy to just kinda not get annoyed or care at all. Like, sometimes when I get annoyed with something, I eventually realize that I'm only really annoyed because I have focused on it so much and let it become such a big thing in my head when I could just as easily move on with my day and stop paying it so much attention, you know? I'm not saying that everyone who hates paint only hates it because they're letting themselves become hyper-focused on it or whatever, but I do think that that is something that can happen, and I know that it certainly happens to me sometimes. So I've really come to accept paint for what it is. Convenient signposting for me. I let it convey to me what it wants to convey. I act accordingly. I move on. It's just another arrow or button prompt or whatever to me. So I like the paint. I think it works well, and my brain and my stanky old monster eyes, only getting stankier and stankier with each passing year, are thankful for it. But I would be remiss not to mention how one big anti-paint argument is that there are other ways to communicate interactability to the player without just smearing everything with brightly colored paint. And you know what? That is true. Lots of games featuring climbing use paint to show the player where they can climb. I'm usually thankful for this myself, but other games get away without the paint, just making sure that ledges and handholds and such just stick out very clearly and are intuitively placed. And to return to Resident Evil, one argument against putting yellow markings on breakable boxes is that in the original game, breakable boxes managed to stand out without using yellow at all. These boxes are just lighter than the rest. They always use the same unique sizes and shapes, so they're always easy to differentiate from the various boxes and crates that decorate the environments. They just stick out. It's still visual, but it's not quite so, like, explicit, you know? And I won't deny, this is a much more elegant approach. However, I think this kind of signposting just isn't as easy as it used to be. On older hardware, especially in games without active lighting systems, it was easier to make objects stand out. You know, it's kind of like how in old cartoons, you can always tell which object on screen is gonna move. You know, the animated cell just stands out so clearly from the background. I could be wrong, but I feel like older games are a little similar. Interactable objects were often just rendered differently from the environment, which often had lighting baked into its textures. Or at the very least, there was just less going on graphically, so it was easier to keep both things separate. Newer games, though, there's just too much going on. Resi 4 in particular, the world is littered with boxes and objects. Maybe you can try to come up with these subtle little ways for the player to tell objects apart, but the whole thing is easier said than done. And each type of interactable object requires its own unique visual cues. If you don't absolutely nail those cues, then the player might have to do a lot of guesswork. This place is stuffed to the brim with boxes and broken down equipment. I don't want to be knifing fake boxes or trying to use broken tools. I don't want to run around mashing the interact button just in case there's something I could use. I like walking into a room and instantly knowing at a glance what I can do. There's no denying that natural signposting can be superior. Anytime a game can communicate something to a player without spelling it out for them or using methods that are kind of natural but still very blatant, like paint, that's terrific. But like I said, it's just not always easy. Sometimes the development pipeline doesn't allow it. Sometimes one team is making the environment and another team is figuring out how to let the player interact with it, and there isn't much time to craft every little thing so that it visually communicates something to the player in a completely diegetic, in-world, realistic way. Honestly, I can't blame them for just slapping some paint or tape or whatever on there and calling it done. It's easiest for them, and honestly, it's easiest for me too. Once I learn yellow equals I can use it, boom, done. I don't even have to think about it for the rest of the game. Now, it is also true that having options to disable these kinds of hints, I mean, that's perfect. That's the best of both worlds. That's everybody wins. The 2013 Tomb Raider reboot uses splotches of paint for signposting, but the third game in the trilogy, Rise of the Tomb Raider, allows the player to turn off all hints, including paint and even glowing highlights around objects, which is another option we haven't even discussed yet. Yeah, in a perfect world, world, we could all just turn off the paint whenever we wanted to. But frustratingly, this is probably another case of easier said than done. To me, a layman, it seems like such an option would be very easy to implement. But I know that especially with AAA games, it can be hard to sneak in all the features the devs want because time and resources are limited and everything has to come in under budget, yada yada. Even if it's a simple option, there are probably loads of other simple options they're not including as well, simply because not enough people will really care that much. So it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, and it gets left out. And I do believe that in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't matter. People are annoyed by it. We're all talking about it, but they're probably not that annoyed. I really don't think there are very many people who are so put off by it that they're gonna skip out on an amazing game because there are splotches of yellow paint here and there. This is one of those things that are fun to argue about, but ultimately probably don't matter too much. And while there are plenty of subjects where I do feel that one side is right and the other is wrong, in this case, it really just comes down to your own personal tastes and experiences. Very rarely will every single camp feel perfectly catered to. I'm fine with the paint. If you're not, then that's cool too. I don't know. Well, thank you for watching. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go follow this thick yellow line that leads to the kitchen.